Oh, hey, welcome back, students of the Alyosha Society, where we're going to keep on pursuing truth, beauty, and goodness. We call those the transcendentals. Transcendentals. We've talked about that quite a bit here at the Alyosha Society. We're looking at Michael Schar's book, The Kiler Angels, and I am back here with Dr. John Wilsey. There's one thing, John, in your bio that we forgot to mention. And to be honest with you, I think a lot of students watching this video might be interested in the college where you teach. Now, we mentioned Southern Baptist Theological Seminary. So our students may or may not know that also, are they actually on the same campus?
Yeah.
It is. Okay. Boyce College, 30 seconds or less, John, tell us what is Boyce College and what do you teach there?
Boyce College is the undergraduate program at Southern Seminary. It's separate from the seminary, so it's its own thing. Boyce College is its own thing. Boyce College has maybe 1,500 students or something like that, all residential. Mm-hmm. So campus life is really vibrant. I teach church history 1, 2, and I teach American history at Boyce. I love my Boyce students. I teach graduate students as well, but my Boyce students are always my favorite because they keep me young, Bruce. They keep me young. Boyce students, they laugh at my jokes. Seminary students don't always laugh at the jokes because they don't always have the best sense of humor. But the Boyce students are great. The students come and they can major in biblical studies, of course.
Yeah.
But it's not just a Bible college. It's really a Christian college. So you can major in business. You can major in teaching. You can major in humanities.
Yeah.
We have an honors college at Boyce, the Augustine Honors Collegium. You can come to Boyce and do a 5-year degree where you get a bachelor's degree and a master's degree.
I want to plug that.
Yeah. So
Boyce, one extra year to get your master's degree.
One extra year to get your master's degree.
Yeah.
Boyce is a great school. The kids at Boyce love it. It's as I said, the student life is great. One thing I always do with my Boyce students, I don't do this with my seminary students. Whenever I teach a section of a historical class, a history class in my at Boyce, I always take all the students out on a night hike. That's what we do. So we go out on a night hike up in Indiana. There's a good wilderness up there, or we go down to Mammoth Cave National Park.
Oh man!
Right in the middle of the night, we stay out all night.
That's awesome.
You said orienteering earlier. We go off trail.
Yeah.
We go map and compass. I do have one married couple. They're married because of the night hike. So they in the spring class and they met and got together on the night hike, and now they're married.
Well, and
it's a great way to meet your spouse. You know what I'm saying?
They're going to be telling that story for decades, man.
Yeah.
And it was very, very cool. A couple of years ago, I had a couple of my own students here at Veritas Academy in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, who graduated and then went straight over to Boyce and had Dr. Wilsey. And I got to tell you, I was going to say loved it, but I think they're still there. So they love it. They love it. And I know at least one of them had you. Actually, both of them did, I think, didn't they? Yeah, you had both of them. Anyway, sorry, we're rambling here. Video number 5 brought to you by Boyce College. Okay, so that's our advertisement. Okay, students, I want to just remind you that you need to be keeping up with the big picture schedule here. And hold on, and I will just pull my slide up. So friends, we've done 4 of the videos. We're going to be finishing out Wednesday in this video. So you should have read all of Wednesday, July the 1st, 1863. There are the videos for the rest the rest of them. So let's get right to it. So, all right, John, let's get right into it here. Wednesday, July the 1st, 1863. One of the things that I think the civilians like myself, we don't know a whole lot really about what goes into planning. Like, how do you plan a war? You know, do you map the whole thing out? Do you just kind of start shooting at people and wait and see what happens? you know, so I wanted to dig in a little bit to, was this battle on the radar specifically for Robert E. Lee? So did he plan on or intend this battle, or did it just kind of unfold, kind of a day by day, almost, you might even say, accidentally?
Yeah, it was an accident. It
Oh,
was not supposed to happen. At least in Lee's mind, it was not supposed to happen this way. And that's a really fascinating question, because I think that about 90% of the explanation for the Confederate loss is because it was unplanned. It's because it was an accident.
oh,
You had asked something about June 30th. One of the things that happened on June 30th, I forgot to mention, was that Buford's
Tuesday.
on Tuesday,
Yeah.
Buford's cavalry brigade had arrived in Gettysburg on the 30th. And they were able to see the lay of the land. They were able to see the strategic value of Cemetery Hill, Cemetery Ridge when they got there. So they were already there in Gettysburg when Henry Heath's division marched down the Chambersburg Pike into town on the morning of the 1st. Now, this is really fascinating, because had Lee known about the strategic value of Cemetery Ridge on the 28th, which is when Harrison came with the news that the Federal Army was in Frederick, he would have been able to get there and hold that ground and get there first. But he was one day late. Buford got there first. It was like a race to that particular very, very important strategic location. And the Union Army beat him by one day. Had Lee had Stuart been available to him, Stuart would most certainly have been able to scout that land, the Cemetery Ridge, long before Buford's cavalry had gotten there. And Lee would have occupied those heights, and there wouldn't have been a battle. There probably wouldn't have been a battle there at all. It's not that he would have occupied the heights and they'd have fought the battle in reverse, and the Confederate Army would have won. It's that he would have occupied the heights and they just wouldn't have had a battle there. But they would have had the battle somewhere else. To answer your question, no, the battle was not planned. Lee did not want to fight there. He had ordered all of his commanders not to bring on a general engagement, because his army had not concentrated yet. They were still strung out on the roads. So when Heath had come into contact with Buford's cavalry, that brought on a general engagement, because Buford was not going to give up those heights. He was not going to give up that ground. They weren't fighting on Cemetery Ridge yet. They were north and west of Cemetery Ridge, on the north and west side of the town. But Buford, if you go to Gettysburg, you'll see that Gettysburg sits on land that is undulating. There are ridges and there are creeks, and it rolls like that. And so Buford knew that, you got to get in there and you got to take those ridge lines, right? But Buford was determined to hold those heights all around the town of Gettysburg. And when he saw Heath's division come up, he immediately sent word to the Union First Corps commander, John Reynolds, who was from Pennsylvania. And Reynolds came up with his division, or excuse me, his corps rather, and supported Buford and took over for Buford, whereas it was just cavalry that were holding the ridges northwest of town. now it was Reynolds's corps that began to, reinforce all those lines. And it became, on the 1st, it became a battle between the 1st Corps of the Union Army and the 3rd Corps of the Confederate Army. And all day it was sort of touch and go. Lee didn't want to fight there. When Lee heard cannon and gunfire, he rode up and asked Heath what was going on. What happened? Did you not receive my orders to not bring on a general engagement? And Heath just didn't know what was in front of him. He didn't know that Buford's cavalry was there because they didn't have Stuart. They didn't have any cavalry of their own. So Heath had really done the work of a cavalryman. He had found the Union Army. And Heath was being thrown back by Buford and later by Reynolds. But then something happened that became very important to the events of the day. Ewell and his 2nd Corps, remember, they had been up at Harrisburg and Carlisle in that area,
right? Yep.
About 10 miles north of the town. In the afternoon, Ewell's corps and he had 3 divisions in his corps. They came crashing down onto the Union right, onto Reynolds's right. And those were fresh troops, whereas Reynolds had been giving Heath and the 3rd Corps a run for their money. Ewell's 3 divisions came into the battle, and it was the break of a stalemate. And so by the late afternoon of the 1st, the 3rd Corps and the 2nd Corps converged on the 1st Corps, and then also the 11th Corps under Oliver Howard. They had come up from Emmitsburg and had occupied Cemetery Ridge. Also, Winfield Scott Hancock, 3rd Corps, I believe, of the Union Army, he had come up that afternoon. But the 2nd and 3rd Corps of the Confederate Army pushed the Union Army through the town of Gettysburg, southeast, and pushed them up onto the heights of Cemetery Ridge and Cemetery Hill. And that was the end of the 1st day. So it was the 1st day, as you know from just reading the book, was a stunning victory for the Confederacy. They hadn't wanted to fight there. Lee did not want to fight there, but Lee changed his mind because the fortunes of the day were going in the direction of the Confederacy.
Well,
and so he ordered a general engagement with those units of the Federal Army.
So okay, that kind of leads me right into my next question. First of all, that's fascinating that for students just to think about that. This one of the most famous battles in any country of any time period was not even planned. It wasn't even planned. But what you just said brings me to my next question. So are you saying then that at the end of the 1st day, the Confederate Army was sort of poised for a great victory?
Yes and no. Yes and no. Lee did not want to fight in Gettysburg. He wanted to have a battle. He wanted to have a decisive battle somewhere north of the Pennsylvania line. But he envisioned that battle to take place somewhere north of Gettysburg. Gettysburg, the town of Gettysburg is like, and I think even Michael Shaw uses this description somewhere in the book, that the roads converging on Gettysburg were like spokes in a wheel. So it was sort of a natural place for the armies to converge because there were several roads that came in from north, east, and south from all directions. They all converged on Gettysburg. And so it was a natural place for them to fight there because all the roads came into that area. But once Lee saw that the Union Army is being thrown back and desperately so, Union soldiers were running for their lives through the town of Gettysburg because of the coordinated efforts of Hill's Corps and Ewell's Corps. So in that regard, it looks like a setup for a Confederate victory. And
Yeah.
Lee thought that the next day would do it. He thought that the next day would do it.
Well, so okay, so Lee after the first day, you're saying Lee settles in and he's thinking we're going to finish this tomorrow.
Yes.
Okay.
Remember that Lee's overall strategy was to defeat the Union Army corps by corps. There were 11 corps in the Union Army. There were only 3 corps in the Confederate Army. That sounds like, oh, wow, that sounds like a huge disparity. A corps in the Union Army, which is the largest military unit in the Army at that time, a corps was comprised of about 10,000 men in the Union Army. But in the Confederate Army, a corps was about 25,000 men.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
Yeah. So it sounds like a huge disparity. It's not really. A corps in the Union Army was about the size of a division. Let me just back up. So you got company is the lowest. Then you've got above that battalion.
Let me this real quick, John. As you're doing those, if you happen to know a ballpark number, then throw that in there. But if not,
yeah, I mean the numbers were hard because usually, I mean, there's a set number, but then all of them were different because of casualties and so forth.
Okay, that's fine.
Ultimately, you have battalion, you have company, battalion, then you have regiment. A regiment generally was 1,000 men.
Okay.
3 regiments made a brigade, and the brigade is the basic unit of movement on a Civil War battlefield. So the brigade is the main thing you need to be concerned about.
Okay.
Just above brigade was division. There were 3 brigades to a division. And in the Confederate Army, there were 3 divisions to a corps.
Okay.
And it was roughly the same. I mean, it was the exact same, hierarchy in the Union Army, but the numbers were very different. In the Union Army, a brigade was much smaller, a division was smaller, and a corps was smaller.
So are you saying that there would have been somewhere in the neighborhood of 75,000 Confederate troops?
There were about 75,000 Confederate troops, and there were about 80,000 Union troops.
Okay.
So it was one of those, like one of the rare times when you had almost exact parity on both sides.
Okay.
Okay, so on the one hand, it looked like it was a setup for a victory. But remember, Lee's strategy is to find high ground and defeat the Union Army piecemeal, piece by piece, as it was coming up. At the end of July 1st, it seemed like Lee was doing exactly what he wanted to do, because he had defeated 3 Union corps in one day. And the rest of the Union Army was strung out from Gettysburg all the way south into Maryland. Meade wanted to defend the Pipe Creek line. So it looked like, okay, Gettysburg, the end of the day, looked like it was a battle that had been won by the Confederacy. Except for one key thing. When Lee's forces took the town of Gettysburg, they pushed the Union troops south of town, which is where Cemetery Hill was. And Cemetery Hill is about 100 feet above the town. Cemetery Hill looks down on the town, and it's real steep. It's a real steep climb up Cemetery Hill. It's a natural fortress. I think Winfield Scott Hancock called it a medieval castle. You fortify those heights, and you can hold it all day against any kind of numbers. So in defeating the Union Army, they had actually pushed the Union Army up onto those heights. And Hancock in particular saw that the value, the tactical, the strategic value of holding those heights. Oliver Howard, who was the Corps commander of the 11th Corps, he had set up his artillery on those heights on the late afternoon of the 1st. So the retreating men were able to come up and get behind a protective wall of artillery. And then the night of the 1st, they were digging in and reinforcing their position to anticipate an attack the next day. Now, Lee, very famously, and this is covered in the book and in the movie, not so much, well, in the movie a little bit, not, it's much covered, much greater detail in the book. But this is what Lee did. Lee had ordered Ewell, after he had pressed the Federals and pushed them out of town, to assault Cemetery Ridge and Culp's Hill, which is where the Union troops were retreating. The order came at about 6 o'clock in the afternoon. 6 o'clock in the afternoon in July. Still plenty of light. I mean, it's
plenty of time to fight.
Plenty of time to fight. But Ewell had been marching his men all the way from Harrisburg and Carlisle, which is about 15, 20 miles. And they had deployed and fought a major battle for all the afternoon. And they were tired. So Ewell was not sure that he could actually pull it off. Ewell had served as a division commander under Stonewall Jackson. When Jackson gave orders, they were always very specific. He always told Ewell exactly what to do, when to do it, with how many men. But Lee's style of command was very different from Jackson. Lee was a strategist. He was not a tactician. So Lee saw the big picture, and then he would order the disposition of troops strategically, but then he would leave it to his commanding officers to follow through as they saw fit.
Okay.
So the orders that he gave to Ewell were, take Cemetery Hill, and here are the key words, if practicable. If practicable. Now, those were throwaway words for Lee. He said that all the time. He said that like we might say, God willing. A lot of us are probably sincere when we say that, but let's face it, God willing is often just an idiom, right?
Right. Yeah.
If practical, take the heights, if practical, pursue the Federals, if practical. Practicable. It's an old 19th century expression. Well, Ewell, being used to the way Jackson commanded, he read that to say, if I think it's a good idea, it's my decision.
Discretion.
But what Lee meant was take those heights. In fact, all afternoon, after 6 p.m., after he had sent the orders, Lee was looking through his binoculars, watching to see how the assault on those heights was going to go. And he was alarmed that nothing was happening.
Yeah.
He actually rode out at about 7 o'clock to find out what was going on. Why hadn't Ewell attacked the heights yet? And, he was there with his division commanders. Edward Johnson, who was a division commander, he didn't have all his men up yet. Early was there with his men, and Early was itching to go. Rhodes was there, but Rhodes had been in a major fight that he had almost lost. It was almost a disaster for him. Rhodes was a little bit trigger shy, if you will. And Early was itching to go, but Ewell was indecisive. Lee actually suggested to move the entire Second Corps out of the town of Gettysburg and up onto Seminary Ridge, which is overlooking Cemetery Ridge. And in fact, wrote the orders out, but then changed his mind at the last minute. Anyway, all this to say that, to answer your question, was this a setup for a victory or defeat for the Confederates? It's a little bit of both. It all is going to depend on what happens the next day.
Yeah. That brings us to Thursday, July the 2nd. Okay, students, be sure, what I want you to do is I want you to read the first half of Thursday, July the 2nd. We'll spend 2 videos kind of talking about that. Good stuff. I mean, really, really good stuff. So what we'll do in the next video, though, is I want to entertain the question of when every once in a while when we're reading American history, we see individuals from other countries that just kind of show up and, maybe they have some interest in what's going on. And that's what's going to happen in our next video. We'll talk about that as we get into Thursday. Dr. Wilsey, are you up for another one?
Let's do it.
All right. See you then, students.